It was supposed to be just another day in the void. The Sparrowhawk, humanity's most advanced warship, drifted silently through the stars, its engines whispering against the cosmic winds as its crew prepared for the next mission. The war, after all, had been dragging on for years. Humanity had thrown everything it had into the conflict, and yet, the tide of battle had not turned in their favor. The alien forces, an ancient race known as the Zal, were relentless, their advanced fleets seeming invincible, their strategies impeccable. But for Captain Eleanor Ellie Hart, leader of the Sparrowhawk, there was always hope. She had spent the better part of her life fighting to prove that humanity could make a difference, that they could hold their ground against forces much older and more powerful than them. She had seen the death toll climb, witnessed countless battles lost, and yet, she never wavered in her belief that humans could change the course of history. But today, something felt different. "Captain," said Lieutenant Michael Arkin, her tactical officer, his voice crackling over the comms as Ellie stared out the viewport at the deep void ahead. "We've just received a strange transmission from the front lines. It's from the Zal." Ellie's brow furrowed, her grip tightening on the edge of her console. The Zal never communicated unless they had something significant to say, and they were known for their pride, rarely offering truces or deals. They were conquerors, not negotiators. "Patch it through." The image that appeared on the screen was not what Ellie expected. Instead of the usual Zal warlord, a deep voice echoed from the static-filled transmission. "Humanity," it growled. "Your time is up. Your resistance is futile. The Black Fleet will arrive soon, and with it, your annihilation will be assured." Ellie's stomach turned. She had heard rumors about the Black Fleet, the Zal's most feared and powerful armada, rumored to be a secret weapon they had kept hidden for centuries. No one truly knew the full extent of its power. It was said that the fleet could obliterate entire star systems in an instant, with weapons that could bend the very fabric of spacetime. To make matters worse, the Black Fleet had never been seen before, until now. "This is bad," Michael muttered, his face pale on the other side of the screen. "Captain, if they're deploying the Black Fleet now, we're in serious trouble." Ellie's mind raced. She knew what this meant. The Zal were throwing everything they had into ending humanity's resistance once and for all. The war, which had seemed a long and drawn-out struggle, was suddenly reaching a critical point. But there was no turning back now. "Alert the crew. We're jumping to the front lines. Prepare for battle," Ellie commanded, her voice firm as she stood tall. "And Michael, I want all the intel on this Black Fleet as soon as you can get it. We can't fight an unknown enemy." As the crew scrambled to get the Sparrowhawk ready for the jump to the front lines, Ellie turned to the ship's main viewport, staring at the stars outside. They were beautiful, silent, distant and cold. But her thoughts were anything but serene. If the Black Fleet was truly coming, humanity was about to face a reckoning. For the first time in years, Ellie couldn't see a way out. "Captain," came Michael's voice once more, his tone almost unnervingly calm. "I've got the data. The Black Fleet is real. And it's already on its way here." Ellie looked over at him, her expression hardened. "How long do we have?" Michael hesitated, glancing at his terminal before speaking. "We'll be in range of their fleet in under 6 hours. The tension was palpable. 6 hours. That's all they had before the Black Fleet arrived to crush them. It felt like a lifetime and no time at all. Humanity had fought so long, so hard, and yet, they had no idea what they were up against. Ellie turned back to the front of the bridge, her thoughts momentarily lost in the expanse of space. She wasn't one to back down, though. Not after everything they had been through. She had always believed in humanity's potential to rise above any challenge, but now, the very survival of the human race seemed uncertain. "Get me a report on the enemy forces," she said, taking a deep breath, shaking the doubt out of her mind. "And I want all ships in the fleet ready for a full-scale assault. If the Black Fleet is coming, then we fight?" Michael's fingers flew across his console, quickly sending out the necessary commands. "I'm pulling up the data now." The Black Fleet is made up of over 200 warships, each one a massive, heavily fortified dreadnought. The most terrifying part, Captain, is the unknown nature of their weapons. They've never been engaged in combat, and no one knows the full extent of their firepower. There are reports of their ability to warp space and time itself, making them impossible to track or predict. Great, Ellie muttered, her mind racing. She had faced many formidable foes in her career, but this was different. This wasn't just a battle, it was a war, one that could decide the fate of all humanity. The Sparrowhawk jumped into hyperspace, the ship's engines roaring as they reached the edge of the war zone. The stars stretched into long, bright lines as the ship moved at light speed toward the inevitable conflict. Ellie's eyes narrowed as she prepared herself for what was to come. As the ship emerged from hyperspace, the sight that greeted them was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Hundreds of massive ships, each one capable of devastating entire fleets, loomed on the horizon. The Zal Black Fleet had arrived. Ellie's breath caught in her throat as she gazed upon the enemy. This was not a force they could defeat through conventional means. This was not just another battle. This was the final confrontation. "All hands brace for impact," she called out. "Engage the enemy. Humanity's survival depends on what we do here today." The Sparrowhawk's weapons systems powered up, and the crew rushed into action, preparing for the greatest battle of their lives. The Black Fleet's appearance had altered the course of the war forever, and humanity's response would either spell their salvation or their doom. Ellie's fingers tightened on the command chair. She would lead her crew through this storm, no matter the odds. She would show the Zal what it meant to challenge humanity. This section introduces the Black Fleet as a new, overwhelming threat that changes the course of the war. Ellie and her crew prepare for the imminent battle, setting the stage for a high-stakes conflict that will determine humanity's future. The tension builds as Ellie faces the uncertainty of confronting an enemy unlike any they've faced before. The Sparrowhawk was positioned at the front lines now, its sleek body cutting through the void as it hovered in the midst of chaos. The Black Fleet had arrived in full force, its sheer numbers overwhelming. Each of the massive dreadnoughts gleamed like the cold, lifeless heart of a war machine, a reminder of the Zal's cold determination. Ellie stood at the helm, her grip on the command console tight as she watched the vast expanse of enemy ships unfolding before her. The final battle was upon them. "This is it," Michael's voice came over the comms, shaky but determined. "We have no choice but to engage. Their ships are too advanced for us to outrun or hide from." Ellie's gaze swept across the battlefield. The Black Fleet was massive, far larger than any force humanity had ever assembled. It wasn't just their numbers that posed a problem, it was the unknown capabilities of their ship. The intelligence they'd gathered so far spoke of strange weapons, energy blasts that could tear apart entire fleets in seconds, and warping technology capable of shifting space itself, making it impossible to predict their movements. "Prepare the fleet for full-scale engagement," Ellie ordered, her voice unwavering, despite the storm of nerves that had built in her stomach. "We fight as one. We push them back, whatever it takes." The crew responded in unison, and the Sparrowhawk's weapons systems hummed to life. Energy cannons powered up, and fighters launched from the hangars in rapid succession. Each one of them had a role to play in this battle for survival. As much as humanity had fought to hold its ground, the battle was now about taking the fight to the Zal, about pushing back against the seemingly unstoppable force that was descending upon them. But there was a growing sense of uncertainty, a flicker of dread that none of them could shake. Despite the strength of the human forces, they had never faced anything like the Black Fleet. Ellie had seen countless battles, but this was something else entirely. The enemy ships seemed to blink in and out of existence, shifting their positions as though they were not bound by the rules of space and time. Michael had been tracking their movements, but his reports were fragmented. "They're warping around us," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "No matter how many times I track them, they're getting closer. It's like they can predict our movements before we even make them." Ellie's heart pounded in her chest. There was no time to waste on fear or doubt. "We've faced enemies with the upper hand before," she said, her voice cutting through the growing tension. "What they're doing, it's like nothing we've ever encountered, but we're not out of options. We'll use everything we've got." As if to emphasize her words, the first salvo from the Black Fleet hit. A massive burst of energy slammed into the Sparrowhawk's hull, shaking the ship violently. Alarms blared as the ship's shields flickered and faltered. Ellie gritted her teeth, adrenaline surging through her veins. "Status report," she barked, her eyes never leaving the battlefield. "We've lost auxiliary power," came the response from engineering. "Shields are down to 40%. We're taking hits faster than we can regenerate." Ellie's pulse quickened. They needed a plan, and they needed it fast. It was one thing to be fighting an enemy that was predictable, but this was something entirely new. The Black Fleet wasn't just attacking, they were manipulating space itself. Time itself seemed to warp around their ships, giving them an edge that couldn't be matched by traditional tactics. "We need to fight fire with fire," Michael said, breaking through her thoughts. "We need to get closer to one of their dreadnoughts and initiate an energy siphon. I've been studying their energy readings. We can siphon their power supply and disrupt their ability to warp space." Ellie's eyes snapped to him. "How close do we need to get?" Michael's face was pale, his voice serious. "Too close. The risk is high, but it's our best shot at turning the tide. If we can shut down one of their ships, we'll have a chance to break through their formation." Ellie's mind raced. There was no other way. The Black Fleet's strange warping abilities made it impossible to fight them head-on. But an energy siphon? That was their only chance. "Do it," Ellie commanded. "Prepare the siphon. We'll engage and create an opening." The Sparrowhawk surged forward, its engines firing at full thrust as the ship angled toward the nearest Black Fleet dreadnought. The alien ships loomed larger, their dark hulls casting ominous shadows over the battlefield. Each one of them was a titan, capable of annihilating anything that dared approach. "Captain, be careful!" Michael's voice came through the comms again. "We don't know what kind of defense systems they have in place. Getting close to one of them is dangerous, especially if they decide to retaliate." Ellie clenched her jaw, her focus razor-sharp. "We don't have time for caution. Get that siphon ready, Lieutenant. We're going in." The Sparrowhawk's weapons opened fire as it moved into position, unleashing a barrage of energy blasts aimed directly at the closest Black Fleet dreadnought. The first shots barely scratched the surface of the enemy ship, but it was enough to create a distraction. Ellie wasn't looking to destroy them. Not yet. She needed a window to get in close. As they closed the gap, Zorith, who had been standing at the communications console, shouted across the bridge. "Captain, they're initiating a countermeasure. The space around the dreadnought is collapsing. It's creating a gravitational distortion field." Ellie didn't flinch. "Hold steady. This is exactly why we need to get close." The ship trembled as they flew into the distorted field. The gravitational pull shifted wildly, sending tremors through the Sparrowhawk. The crew braced themselves, gripping their stations as the ship fought against the unstable environment. Michael shouted, "We're in range. The siphon is online." Ellie's eyes locked onto the target. "Activate the siphon now." The ship shuddered once more as the energy siphon activated, a brilliant beam of light shooting toward the Black Fleet's dreadnought. For a moment, nothing happened. The field around the dreadnought warped again, and the beam flickered. Come on," Ellie muttered, gritting her teeth. The beam flickered and pulsed, finally hitting the heart of the dreadnought's power core. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the Black Fleet ship suddenly shuddered, its lights dimming. "Yes," Michael shouted. "We've got them." The Black Fleet dreadnought began to slow, its ability to warp space significantly reduced. Without their warping technology, they were vulnerable. Ellie knew this was their opening. "Now," she said, her voice calm but fierce, "engage the fleet. This is our chance." The Sparrowhawk surged forward, all weapons blazing as humanity's finest threw everything they had at the Black Fleet. The moment had arrived. The war had changed forever, and now, humanity had a shot at victory. The moment they had all been waiting for had arrived. The first wave of humanity's counterattack had struck the Black Fleet, creating a fragile opening. But even as the Sparrowhawk and the rest of the human fleet pressed their advantage, Ellie knew this was just the beginning of a much greater struggle. The Black Fleet was not some ordinary enemy. It was an overwhelming force, a force that could shift the very fabric of space-time, warp reality itself, and make every attempt at strategy seem futile. The Black Fleet had recovered from their initial energy siphon attack faster than Ellie expected. With their ability to warp, it seemed that no matter how much humanity tried to attack, the Zal would always have a counter. Ellie clenched her jaw. It wasn't enough. Not yet. They needed to press their advantage, but the moment they did, the Black Fleet seemed to respond with greater force. "Captain," Michael called from his station, his voice full of disbelief, "they're using the distortion field again. They're generating a massive gravity well that's pulling us toward them." Ellie felt her heart skip a beat. It was as if the very space between them and the Black Fleet had become a trap. She could see it on the monitors. The vast concentration of gravitational energy pulling the Sparrowhawk directly into the heart of the Black Fleet's formation. "All hands brace for impact," she ordered. Her hands moved swiftly across the console, trying to stabilize the ship's trajectory. "Michael, how much time do we have before the gravity well overwhelms us?" "Just seconds," he replied urgently. "It's pulling us in faster than we can compensate. If we don't act now, we'll be pulled into their core, where we'll be sitting ducks." Ellie's mind raced. There was no time to think. They had prepared for a fight, but not like this. Not with the very fabric of space itself working against them. They couldn't outrun the gravity well. Not in the Sparrowhawk, and certainly not with the Zal ships warping around them. Then she remembered something, a strategy they'd used in smaller skirmishes, a trick that could help them break free. It was risky, but it was their only shot. "Michael, initiate a reverse warp," she commanded, her voice clear despite the chaos unfolding around them. "We're going to use the gravity well to our advantage." Michael's eyes widened in disbelief. "Captain, you're suggesting we reverse our engines, using their gravity against us? That could—" "I know," Ellie interrupted. "But it's the only chance we have. Do it now." Without hesitation, Michael pulled the trigger, and the engines of the Sparrowhawk roared to life in reverse. The ship shook violently as its reverse thrusters fired, using the immense gravity to slingshot them away from the core of the Black Fleet's formation. The Sparrowhawk fought against the gravitational pull with everything it had, pushing the ship to its limit. The massive energy field around them flickered as the ship surged forward, away from the imminent collision. For a moment, the gravity well seemed to win, pulling the ship back in, but then, with a final thrust, the Sparrowhawk broke free, hurtling into the open void. "That was too close," Michael breathed, his hands still shaking. "I thought for sure we were done for." Ellie wiped the sweat from her forehead, her eyes scanning the field. They had escaped, but the price was steep. The reverse warp had drained their power reserves, leaving them vulnerable for a few critical moments. She had made the call, but it wasn't without consequences. The Sparrowhawk was now exposed, and the Black Fleet had noticed. The enemy ships, like shadows in the vastness of space, were closing in once more, their warping abilities faster than human technology could track. "Captain," Zoratha's voice came over the comms, cutting through the tension. "I've been monitoring the enemy fleet. They're regrouping. This is their counteroffensive. It's more coordinated than anything we've seen before. The Black Fleet is not acting randomly anymore." Ellie frowned. The Zal were too calculated, too precise. Even with the odds stacked against them, they always seemed to anticipate humanity's every move. And this time, their counterattack wasn't just another show of force. It was a strategy that could turn the tide of the battle in a heartbeat. "We can't take them head-on," Ellie muttered under her breath. "We need to hit them where it hurts, disrupt their command structure. If we can break their coordination, we can take them down." Michael turned to her, his face serious. "We don't have enough resources to keep up this kind of engagement for long. Their ships are designed for attrition, and we're still running on minimal power." Ellie's mind churned. There had to be something they could use. Then, her eyes caught the view of the Sparrowhawk's sensor data display. A blinking icon appeared. A weak spot in the Zal command network, a vulnerability in their fleet communications. It was small, nearly invisible to the naked eye, but Ellie's gut told her it was the opening they needed. "All right," she said, her voice firm. "This is it. We're going to disrupt their communications. Get close enough to the lead dreadnought and break their command chain. We'll need a precise strike. Right at the heart of their operations." Michael's fingers flew across the control board, and a series of calculations appeared in front of Ellie. He didn't need to speak the words. She could tell from his expression that it would be tight. "We've got one shot at this, Captain. Get too close and we'll be sitting ducks, but if we can get the right angle—" Ellie nodded. "Do it. Prepare the fleet for a targeted strike. We'll have one shot at this." The crew sprang into action, their movements synchronized, their focus sharp as a blade. The Sparrowhawk turned, its engines firing up for another burst of speed as they closed in on the Zal flagship. The gravity distortion fields pulsed around them, but Ellie didn't flinch. She was used to thinking on her feet. Humanity had always survived against the odds by doing the unexpected, by exploiting weaknesses others had missed. Michael's voice cut through the air. "Captain, we're in range. Get ready for a hard punch." Ellie braced herself. The next moments would decide everything. Their plan was risky. It was unorthodox, but they had no choice. The Black Fleet would not relent unless they broke their control. "Now!" Ellie shouted. The Sparrowhawk leapt forward, its weapons blazing as they fired directly at the heart of the lead Zal dreadnought. The targeted strike sent ripples through the distortion field, cracking the ship's communication network. The Black Fleet's coordination fractured in an instant. The enemy ships, now without their leader's orders, scattered in confusion, allowing humanity's forces to press the attack. Ellie leaned back in her seat, her breath heavy with anticipation. The gamble had paid off, but it wasn't over yet. There were still far too many Black Fleet ships, and they were starting to regroup. "Get ready, everyone," Ellie said, her eyes cold with resolve. "This is just the beginning." The battle raged on as the Sparrowhawk tore through the heart of the Black Fleet's defensive line. With their command structure momentarily fractured, the Zal ships seemed to be disoriented, their once perfect coordination falling apart. The human fleet, emboldened by the sudden opening, pressed the attack with all their might, launching barrage after barrage of energy weapons toward the scattered enemy ship. Ellie stood at the helm, her eyes locked onto the view screen, tracking every movement of the enemy ship. The Sparrowhawk's weapons systems hummed to life as they fired, but her mind was already elsewhere. Even though they had landed a heavy blow to the Black Fleet's command, the war was far from over. They had disrupted the Zal's coordination, but they still had to finish what they had started, and the clock was ticking. "Captain," Michael's voice crackled through the comms, "the Black Fleet is starting to reorganize. Their communications are back online, but they're not as synchronized as before. We still have a shot here. If we can keep up the pressure, we can break them." Ellie's gaze shifted from the view screen to the tactical readout. The Zal had regrouped, but their formation was now scattered, their flagship no longer acting as a unifying force. This was humanity's moment to strike. Ellie had made the decision to target the Zal flagship to destabilize their fleet, and it had worked, but only for a short time. They needed to exploit the confusion and press the advantage. "Push forward," Ellie ordered, her voice steady. "We've got them on the ropes. The Sparrowhawk will lead the charge. All ships, follow our lead and concentrate fire on the remaining dreadnoughts." A deep breath escaped Ellie's chest as she gave the order. There was no hesitation in her voice, but the weight of the moment pressed on her. It was all or nothing now. If they could break the Zal's formation for good, humanity might have a fighting chance to push them back. But failure wasn't an option. The Sparrowhawk surged forward, her engines roaring as the ship's weapon systems activated once more. Every shot fired was calculated, aiming to take down key elements of the Black Fleet. Each blast sent ripples through the fabric of the enemy's defenses, creating cracks in their once formidable line. As the human fleet pushed forward, the atmosphere aboard the Sparrowhawk was electric. The crew, though exhausted from the long and brutal conflict, were fighting with a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just a battle for survival anymore. This was humanity's stand. They had fought for years, been beaten back time and time again, but now they had a chance to change the outcome of the war. "Captain, the flagship is in our sights," Michael said, a sense of urgency in his voice. "We've got one shot at this. The Zal flagship is the heart of their fleet. Take it out, and we'll cripple their ability to fight back." Ellie nodded, her mind clear. She had already made up her mind. They had to destroy the flagship, or the war would drag on for years more, with humanity losing ground every day. They had been waiting for this moment, the chance to strike a blow that would reshape the war. She wasn't going to let it slip away. "Prepare for a full-scale assault," Ellie said, her voice resolute. "Target the flagship's central command core. All weapons, fire on my mark." The Sparrowhawk closed the distance, its weapons charged and ready. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. Ellie's hands gripped the console tightly as her eyes tracked the enemy ship. She could see the energy shields flickering around the flagship, but there was an opening, a small vulnerability. It was now or never. "Fire!" Ellie commanded. A torrent of energy erupted from the Sparrowhawk's weapons, lancing toward the Zal flagship. The ship's energy shields cracked under the intense barrage, and then, with a violent explosion, the flagship's core was breached. The blast sent a shockwave through the Black Fleet, and for a moment time seemed to freeze. The once imposing fleet of the Zal began to falter, its ships now fragmented and vulnerable. Ellie's breath caught in her throat as she watched the explosion ripple through the flagship. The Zal flagship, the heart of their fleet, had been destroyed. The Black Fleet, without their leader, was now in disarray. For the first time in years, Ellie allowed herself a moment of relief. The war wasn't over, but they had won a significant battle, a turning point that would go down in history. "Captain, the fleet is retreating," Michael shouted. "We did it. The Black Fleet is retreating." Ellie's eyes scanned the battlefield. The enemy ships, now disorganized and leaderless, were pulling back, retreating into the unknown depths of space. The human fleet had struck a decisive blow. The Black Fleet had been broken. For a moment there was silence. The crew stood at their stations, stunned by the magnitude of what they had just accomplished. It had been a fight for survival, but it had become something more, something that would change the course of history. Ellie stood, her hands trembling slightly as she allowed herself a breath of relief. The Zal were not defeated, but they had been pushed back. The war was far from over, but this victory was a symbol, proof that humanity could stand toe-to-toe with the most advanced forces in the galaxy and emerge victorious. "We did it," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. "We stopped them?" Ellie nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Not yet. But we've given them a taste of what humanity can do." She turned to the crew, her gaze meeting theirs with a newfound sense of determination. "This war isn't over. But today, humanity has shown the galaxy that we will not be crushed. We will fight and we will win. Together." As the Sparrowhawk drifted through the aftermath of the battle, Ellie looked out at the stars, the void of space stretching out before her. The war was far from finished, but the tide had turned. Humanity had made its mark on the galaxy, and nothing, not even the mighty Black Fleet, could ever erase that. In this final section, the Sparrowhawk and humanity's forces deliver the decisive blow to the Black Fleet, crippling the Zal's ability to control the war. The crew's resourcefulness and determination prove that, against all odds, humanity can change the course of the war. With the flagship destroyed, the Zal fleet is forced to retreat, but the story ends with the understanding that the war is far from over. The battle is a symbol of humanity's resilience, and their fight for survival has only just begun.